Today I want to share with you how to pickle beets. This is an old-fashioned pickled beet recipe that's very easy to make and very delicious. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, I love pickled beets. They're a little bit sweet, a little bit salty, a little bit spicy. They kind of have a little bit of everything that makes them so tasty. And they're perfect to top on a salad or serve as a side dish and even just as a snack. And they're very easy to make, and the ingredients are generally very easy to find. First, the star of the show, you're going to need beets. And you're going to want about 3 pounds of beets. And basically, 3 pounds in my case was just two bunches of beets that had 3 beets each in a bunch. So I've got a total of 6 beets here. And these are pretty good sized beets. Some are a little bit larger than others, but overall they're pretty good size. So I think when you are shopping for your beets, whether at the farmer's market or the grocery store, it's easy because if they have a scale and you can weigh it, you're all set. But if you're growing them yourself or buying them at the farmer's market, you want to look for beets that are fairly good in size and have about 6 of those. That'll be about 3 pounds. Now we'll go over the rest of the ingredients, but don't worry, you don't need to write anything down. I'll have a link in the description below, and just open up the description, look for the word recipe. There'll be a link there. That'll take you over to the recipe where you can read it online or you can print it out. So next, what you're going to need is 3 cups of vinegar, and I'm using apple cider vinegar. I think this works best in this recipe, but if all you have is the white vinegar, you can definitely use that too. But if you'd like to learn how to make your own homemade apple cider vinegar, I have a video where I show you how to do that, and I'll be sure to link to it in the iCards and in the description below. It's very easy to make. And next you're going to want 1 cup of water. And that can be any type of water. It can be filtered or spring water or simply from your tap. Next, what I've got over here are 2 red onions. Now these are small. Red onions are normally really big, but I have 2 small ones here. So I'm going to definitely use 2, but if you've just got the really large one, you can go with that. And if you want, you can also use yellow or white onions. It's really your choice, but I love pickled red onions, and I like to include those with the beets. So that's why I'm using red onions. But again, if you want to leave out the onions, you can definitely do that. It's not required, but I highly recommend it. They're very tasty once they're pickled. Next, you're going to need some sugar. You're going to need a 1/2 cup of sugar. And what I've got here is sucanat. This is the dried cane juice. And the word sucanat is just a combination of 3 words, sugar cane natural, sucanat. And it's a wonderful sugar to have in your kitchen. But if you are still on your journey of making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, and you've not incorporated sucanat into your kitchen yet, into your cooking, you can definitely use light brown sugar, or you can even use dark brown sugar, or you can even use sort of you can make a homemade version of sucanat. And if that's something you want to learn to do, it's not exactly like sucanat, but it's fairly close. And I show you how to do that in another video, which I'll link to in the description and in the description and in the iCards. But I highly recommend having something that is rich, like a light brown sugar or a dark brown sugar if you don't have the sucanat. In a pinch, yes, you can use white sugar, but it'll just have a little bit of a difference in flavor. It'll be a little lighter in flavor. And that's fine, because you are going to have your spices, which will help kick up the flavor. Next, you're going to want a teaspoon of allspice berries. Just like this, you don't need the ground, you're just going to have the allspice berries. And you're going to need a teaspoon of whole cloves. Again, you know, this is falling out of my hand there. Again, not the powder, but the whole cloves. And then you're going to want 1 cinnamon stick. And again, you're going to want the cinnamon stick, not the ground cinnamon. Now in a pinch, if you don't have these whole spices, can you use the ground? You can. The only drawback is it does make the brine a little cloudy. And so that's something that you want to be aware of. So if you have the whole spices, it will work better and the brine will come out clearer. If you don't like allspice, if you don't like cloves, if you don't like cinnamon, you can definitely leave them out. These are just sort of the traditional spices that are used when making old-fashioned pickled beets. But if there are spices that you prefer, you can definitely add those to your brine. And if there are herbs that you like, you can use those in making your brine. Some folks like to put in a sprig of rosemary or some thyme. You can definitely do that too. And then finally, all you're going to need is a teaspoon of salt. And this is just a fine ground sea salt, but you can use whatever you have. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to cook our beets. And I'm just going to go ahead and put these in a stock pot, cover them with water, bring them to a boil, and I'm going to simmer them until they're tender. But when I say tender, I don't mean very soft or mushy. You don't want that. You want them almost, although you don't use this term for vegetables, but with pasta you think of al dente. You do want to be able to put a knife through them so that the knife can pierce them, but you want to have just the slightest bit of resistance. And given beets this size, because we're going to cook these whole, that way and then the skins are going to slip off very easily too, so we don't have to worry about peeling them. May take up to 30 minutes, but we'll check and we'll see how the process goes. Now before I put these on the stove, I just want to show you up close that clearly, and hopefully you saw this when they were in the bowl, but just in case, I have removed the top with the greens, and I have removed the little root tail that tends to come off the beet. And so I'm cooking them like that, just with both the top and the bottom cut off. And now we'll go ahead and bring them over to the stove. Well, I cooked my beets. They took about 30 minutes, and I could pierce them with a fork, but there was just the slightest bit of resistance. Like I said, that al dente. You don't want them to be real soft where they might fall apart. And then I drained them, and then I put them in cold water, in a bowl of cold water. And that stops the cooking, and it also makes the skins very easy to basically just rub off. Now, assuming that you washed the outside of your beets well before you went to cook them, when you strain them, you can save that liquid. That's a nice, nutritious broth, so definitely don't throw that out. And you can also save the skins if you want and add them to your scrap bag for that you may keep in your fridge or your freezer for when you make bone broth or vegetable broth. They're great for that. And I really believe everything still has a little bit of nutrition in it. So before completely discarding it, you can just eke out every little bit of nutrition. Now I'm just going to set the beets aside for a minute, but I want to talk about the onion. What I like to do is after I peel the onion, I like to cut it in half, and then when I slice it, I like to make very, very thin half moons. But you really can slice it any way that you like. I find that just works real nice once they're pickled. That's a nice shape once they're pickled. Now I also want to mention about this, I'm a fan of the no waste kitchen, and don't throw out your onion skins because these have a lot of nutrition in them, and they are perfect for saving when you make your bone broths or when you make your vegetable broths. So again, just go ahead and add this to your scrap bin or your scrap bag, whatever way you store your vegetable scraps, and you'll have those to pull out next time you make some type of broth. Now, if you want, even going back to when you're cleaning up your beets, you can certainly wear gloves because they can stain your hands. That's why I've also got a red cutting board and a red apron because beets do tend to stain. I don't worry so much about it because I wash my hands a lot. I'm cooking a lot during the day, and it's pretty easy to wash off. But if you want to wear gloves, you certainly can. And another thing I want to mention about when you buy your beets, if they do come with the beet greens, and when you're preparing them to make pickled beets, save those beet greens, chop them up and saute them. They're delicious. Now you have some options on how you want to cut up your beets. You can make them just in slices, which work very nicely, or you can just make them in little chunks. I actually like to pickle them in little chunks, so that's how I'm going to cut them up today. But whatever way that you like is completely fine. Now to cut them up into the little chunks, what I like to do, oh, I've got some onion here on my knife. I like to cut them in half, and then I like to take the half that I have and just slice this lengthwise. And then I like to cut that piece into 3, and I'll definitely bring you in closer so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And then I like to cut that into 3 again. Then if you decide to cut them the way that I did, when you're all done, you'll have these nice little chunks of beets, and then maybe like about 1-inch squares or so. It's not an exact science, so don't worry about it. But I really like them like this, because if you serve them as a side dish, they're very easy to eat, as opposed to the circular ones that sometimes need to be cut or can get a little messy. And also in this shape, especially with the pickled onions, they can be a very nice addition to a charcuterie platter or an appetizer platter, something like that. Given their high vinegar content that's going to be in the brine, which will be absorbed by the beets, really aids digestion. Well, I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting up all the beets, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now, once you get your beets all cut up, put them into a bowl along with your onions, and then just give them a good stir so that you can completely distribute all of the onions amongst the beets. Now, this is enough to make about 4 pints or 2 quarts of pickled beets. Now, I like to jar them up in pint-sized jars, because this is very similar to if you buy pickled beets, or sometimes they're sold in a jar at your grocery store. They're often sold in about a pint-size container. And so this is a good serving size for our family, but if you would prefer to jar them up in quart-sized jars, you can definitely do that. Now, I want to mention something about the jars. I'm using pint-sized jars that are canning jars and that are wide-mouth jars. I like using wide-mouth jars only because it's just easier to get the contents out. But you can use any jars you want. And I just want to mention, if you're not going to water bath can these to make them shelf stable, then if any recycled jars you have will work, anything that you want to use will work. However, if you do want to water bath can these, then you're going to want to have canning jars and canning lids and canning rings or bands. And if you do decide that you want to water bath can these, you're going to want to leave a 1/2-inch headspace, and you're going to want to process them for 10 minutes. Now, I'm not going to show how to water bath can these today. However, I do have a lot of canning videos, and I'll be sure to link to them in the iCards and in the description below. And specifically in the video where I'm showing how to can bread and butter pickles, the process is the same. A 1/2-inch headspace, 10 minutes in the water bath canner, and so on and so forth. And I go through a lot. It's a very detailed video. So if you're new to water bath canning, this may really help you, because you can just follow the steps. I walk you through step by step in great detail. So if you do want to water bath can these, be sure to refer to that pickle video, because the process is the same. Now, your jars don't need to be sterilized, but they do need to be clean, whether you're going to just jar these up and put them in your refrigerator, or whether you're going to water bath can them. You want to have them either, you can put them in the dishwasher and sterilize them, but it's not necessary. You can wash them in hot, soapy water, rinse them well, let them air dry, and then just keep them clean until you're ready to jar up your beets. Now, at this point, all we're going to do is start spooning our mixtures into our jars. Now, you want to pack these in pretty tight, because once we add the brine, they will float. So you want to make sure they're packed in nice and tight. Now, to make the brine, all that you need to do is add your apple cider vinegar to a saucepan, and then we're just going to add in everything else as well. Now, regarding the spices. If you want, you can tie them up into a little bit of cheesecloth or in a little bit of a little piece of scrap of flour sack towel, something like that. But I don't really find it necessary because we'll just strain it before we decant it over our beets in the jar. Then you want to go ahead and add in your water, and then little by little just get all the rest of these spices in. No particular order. We've got our sugar in here, our sucanat, and then our salt. And that's it. Now we're just going to bring this over to the stove, bring it up to a boil, make sure that the sugar is completely dissolved, and then we'll pour it over our beets. Well, I brought this up to a boil, then turned it down to a simmer, made sure that the sugar was completely dissolving, and allowed it to simmer for about 10 minutes to become infused with the spices. Now I'm going to strain off the spices, but if you want like a really strong flavor of the cinnamon, of the cloves, and of the allspice or whatever other spices you're using, you can put them into the jar, much like when you make pickles and you put in the pickling spice. So that is an option. And if you are using fresh herbs, you can do the same thing. You can put them right into your jars. Now we're going to take our brine and just pour it right down into each of our jars. Now I've got a little bit of brine left over. Don't throw this out. You can use this in place of vinegar if you're making a salad dressing. You can use it to add to other vegetables that you may be brining or pickling. So don't throw that out. Definitely save it. Now, if you're going to refrigerate these, you can just use whatever lids came with the jars that you're using. I've got some storage lids here. These are the made by the canning companies that make them for storing your canned goods after you open them, and then they need to be refrigerated. Open them in the sense that after you've water bath canned them, you've removed the traditional canning lid, and then when you go to refrigerate them, you just use a storage lid like this. But use whatever you have if they're going into your fridge. If they're going into your fridge, they should stay fresh for about 3 months. Now, if you water bath can them and you use the brand new lids that are made for water bath canning, the Ball company that makes those lids say that your canned goods should stay, your beets should stay shelf stable for 18 months. Now, once you open them, then in your refrigerator, they would stay fresh for about 3 months. Now, home canners may say that they'll last longer than 18 months, but 18 months is the official word, so to speak, from the Ball Canning Company. But if we're just going to go ahead and put these right into the fridge, they're going to be good in the fridge for 3 months. And personally, with all the vinegar, I really think they stay, this is my humble opinion, but I think they stay fresh for about 6 months. But definitely the nose test will always tell you if they're still good. Well, I'm just going to fish out a few of this jar and we'll give them a taste test to see how they came. Now, I want to mention, when you go to refrigerate these, now you can eat them right now as is. I think they're going to be pretty delicious. But if you want them nice and cold and you want the onions to soften just a bit more from the pickling process and the beets to absorb some of the brine, it is nice to refrigerate them overnight. Well, let's give them a taste test. Oh, those are delicious. I love pickled beets. And I think you will too. I really hope you'll give them a try. As you see, it's very easy to make and they're really delicious. Now, if you'd like to learn more about how to pickle other vegetables, as well as how to ferment vegetables to make them probiotic rich, be sure to click on this video over here. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.